welcome to Red Reality. Tonight we have a guest from all the way from Israel who has been who had a lecture here the other day where he was talking about the situation in Israel Palestine. Oliver here is with me, and welcome Gideon. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
A trip 5 years in the making, finally happening.
Absolutely, and an old dream of mine.
Just the other day you had the lecture on Hverfisgata, which I recommend. It's on Samstöðin, it's on YouTube. So this is like a follow-up episode of where we dig in and see what's going on. And investigating your life, I saw that you were drafted in the Israeli military when you were, well, how old were you? Like
18.
17? 18. Oh. And you were working for the Israeli Army radio. And you've noted that at the time you didn't really realize that, you thought Israel was a good state and was doing the best they could considering the situation and so on. But that changed over time.
When I was brought up in Israel in the 50s, in the 60s, it was a very young country. Most of our parents were Holocaust survivors. The atmosphere was a very heavy atmosphere, and education and media was nothing but a very massive brainwash system to recruit all of us to the Zionistic dream, to the Zionistic project. And we all of us believed in the Zionistic project. And I always say I was really a good boy Tel Aviv. I followed the rules, I followed what I was told, namely that we, the Jews, are the David, the Arabs are the Goliath, we are the weak ones, they are the strong ones, we are the just ones, they are the evil ones. They have only one thing in their mind, the Palestinians, and this is to kick all of us into the ocean. They were born to kill. All those things we got almost with the milk of our mothers.
It's so horrible to think that
it is.
With the force that the European Jews came in and other Jews, the Nakba was 47, 48. Like the horrible overbearing force that was brought on the Palestinian people. And you were brought up with this myth that you are the weak ones? Terrible.
I tell you more than this. I think I heard the word Nakba only when I was 20, the first time in my life, or at my 20s.
Oh, wow.
Nobody spoke about it. Nobody told me. Now, we saw those ruins along the roads, the very few ruins that they didn't totally erase of the over 400 Palestinian villages that they destroyed and expelled their inhabitants. And I never asked, what are those ruins? Where are the owners? Why did they leave? Those questions were not even in my mindset. And it really took many years until I woke up and opened my eyes.
What is it like? What were you told? How you came to possess the territory in Israel, where it stands?
Are you talking about the 48 territories or the 67 territories?
Like the 48 territories. Were you taught anything about it? Like,
yes, we were taught that this is our land. That the Arab states tried to invade those lands and prevent us of living in peace under our figs and wines and sit peacefully in our land. We were told that a people without land came to a land without people. This is what we were told. We didn't know anything about the Palestinian people living in Palestine for decades, for generations. They were just transparent.
And so, like, for you working in the army and reporting, where were you, like, stationed? Were you in one of these
Jaffa,
territories?
in next to Tel Aviv. I mean, in Palestinian Jaffa, which is now part of Tel Aviv.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought about what's going on around me. I don't think I ever met a Palestinian before I was 20 or 25 or whatever.
Oh, wow.
And was there like a moment for you during those years where the mythology of, that had been imprinted in you started to shake a little?
No, it was really when I started to work as a journalist in Haaretz in the late 80s, which was when I was already in my 30s, when a friend told me, let's go to see some story about a woman who lost all her olive trees because the Israeli army had uprooted them. I said, let's go. And this was my first meeting with the evilness of the occupation. And then a few weeks later, there was something else I went to see in the West Bank. And gradually it hit at my mind that the biggest story of Israel is not being told at all. And there, gradually, I decided to dedicate my career to cover the occupation. People are wrong in Israel because they think I'm covering the Palestinians. Not at all. I'm covering what we are doing to them. I'm covering the occupation, not the Palestinians. I'm interested in what we are doing to them. I do it as an Israeli. Mm-hmm. I come from Israel. I go back to Israel. I never left Israel. I come there as an Israeli to document our crimes. That's my goal.
And through Haaretz, the paper,
yes,
did you publish a lot of stories about what was going on? How was that met in Israel?
Look, I have a column called the Twilight Zone, which goes on now along 35 years. Once a week, at least once a week, I go to the occupied territories. Until 16 years ago, it included Gaza. In the last 16 years, I cannot go to Gaza anymore. So at least once a week I go to the occupied territories and come back with a story about another victim of the occupation. Would it be a child who was shot? Would it be land which was confiscated? Would it be a farmer who was beaten by settlers? Would it be an administrative detainee who sits for months and years without trial? Every week a human story about another crime. So after so many years, it's, I think, thousands of stories, sure.
And are people like resistant to that? Do they call? I read that you've been called a propagandist of Hamas by your political opponents or people who don't like what you're saying. So is that like a sentiment that's shared with many Israelis?
Nobody likes to read bad things about himself.
Yeah.
Nobody likes to look at the mirror and see a very ugly face from the mirror. People try to avoid it. Mm-hmm. And when I try to do it, obviously, it creates a lot of resistance against me, even hatred. But I keep on doing it. I have no idea if it had ever any effect. Only history will judge. It's a very accumulative process in which you keep on telling the stories, no matter what. Mm-hmm. And most people wouldn't read it, but they know it's there. And they see it every Friday in the newspaper that they read. Even if they don't read it, they see the headlines, they see the photos. Something tells them, listen, there is a reality that you know nothing about it. There is a reality which is a criminal reality, a very tragic reality.
You told the story in Safnarhúsið on Hverfisgatan the other day. You were talking about two different villages on the West Bank. One Jewish settler village and then an old Palestinian village. And you were saying how ostensibly these Israeli people should have the same rights. But that's not how it is in reality.
That's my proof that the fact that the occupation is not temporary, it lasting for so many years, that's the proof that Israel is an apartheid state. Because if you go and see two villages, any two villages, I didn't speak about specific two villages, any two villages in the West Bank, one Jewish, one Palestinian, one have all the resources and all the rights, the other has no resources and no rights, how else can you call it if not apartheid? It could have been not apartheid if it would have seemed to be temporary. But after 56 years, without any intention to put an end to it, and Israel has no intention to put an end to it, how else can you call it? That's apartheid.
What it sounds like is that a lot of the Israeli civilians, the population, has had no actual contact with the Palestinians. From your experience, actually being in contact with Palestinians, what is their approach to you, in general? Do you feel are they pleased that you are yourself an Israeli and actually representing them in matters relating to the occupation?
No, I don't think they feel that I'm representing them, because most of the people that I come to visit are grassroots. They hardly know who I am. Yeah. It's not politicians, it's not activists, it's poor people, a farmer here, a refugee there, a driver there. But they, and more than this, their children, are quite shocked to see me. In many cases, I am the only Israeli they've ever seen who is not armed, who doesn't wear a uniform, who doesn't bark at them, who comes to listen to them, not to tell them anything, just to listen to them. I had even one case in which Palestinian children asked me for my ID because they wouldn't believe that I'm Jewish Israeli. They said it cannot be. There are no Jews who speak like you. There are no Jews who come to listen to us. So in this, for them, it's an entire shock. For the population, the fact that there are other Israelis and we are so few, how many Israelis do it? Almost nothing. Is for them, and therefore they are always so warm. I'm always shocked. I'm coming to homes, to parents who lost their baby a day before, 2 days before, by soldiers of my people, by soldiers of my state. And I'm always shocked again and again about the hospitality, the tolerance, and the warmth that they reflect toward me. Because would a Palestinian come to a Jewish family after a terror attack, or as it's called, they would kick him out. They will not talk to a Palestinians. They might have even, lynch him. Mm-hmm. And here, for 35 years, I was never kicked out, maybe once in Gaza, maybe once in 35 years, in which they didn't accept me. They were not willing to talk to me and to tell me the story of their victim. And that's so touching, again and again.
There's one thing we were talking about before we went live, that people in Israel seem to, like the common people, they don't really mind much what's going on. They don't seem to want to pay attention. They disassociate from it, don't want to hear about it, and so on. And I had an experience where we were interviewing a Palestinian refugee in Iceland, and I had known, intellectually about the plight of Palestinians. But when I met a young Palestinian man, and he told me how he lost his parents, in a bombing attack in Gaza, and lost a brother, and so on, it really hits home. But this is the situation in Israel. People don't realize what's going on. They don't want to know about it.
Not only this, they are in denial. And the Israeli media is helping them to be in denial. You tell them the story that you just told me, and they immediately react will be, were his parents terrorists? Are you sure they didn't have weapons at home or explosive materials at home? Immediately they will attack you, only to protect themselves from taking any responsibility for the crimes. And that's even harder because the Israeli media is building it up. The Israeli media is the biggest collaborator with the occupation, and they don't do it because of ideology. They do it only because of commercial considerations. They want to keep their viewers or to keep their readers, and they know they don't want to hear anything about it. So they are doing anything possible to please them. So I wrote 2 weeks ago, there was a baby of 2.5 years who was shot in his head. 2.5 years, shot dead in Nebi Salah, in a village in the West Bank. 2.5 years old. He was shot dead in front of his father, who was injured as well. They did nothing. The Israeli media, except of Haaretz, hardly mentioned it. Now you can imagine yourself if a Palestinian would have shot a Jewish baby. The whole world would have known about it. It would be headlines all over the world, and in Israel they would just speak about those barbarians who shoot babies. And the Israeli media is collaborating with this.
It's a horrible reality. And now, like, people are worried that Netanyahu's administration and the right wing and the settlers, you know, I've seen a lot of footage of like very aggressive settlers. They're kicking people out of their homes and just taking them over, and some of these most like right-wing people seem to be completely like self-righteous in this respect, just kicking people out of their homes, taking it over, waving the flag, you know. Are you concerned about the situation in Israel, about the developments?
We never had it like this. It's not only it's the most right-wing fascist government Israel had. This goes without saying. But under this government, the settlers allowed themselves to act as never before. Those are really barbaric militias. What they are doing is what we call pogroms, which is exactly what the Russians and the Ukrainians did to Jewish villages in East Europe, in Russia, in Ukraine, burning homes, burning cars, burning any agriculture facilities, burning fields, throwing stones at windows. Only last week there were 35 pogroms in 35 different villages in the West Bank. No one was arrested, but not even one single person was arrested. It's all documented. Everyone has a cellular, and every Palestinian takes footage. No one was arrested, which means the Israeli government tells those gangsters, please go on. We will not do anything to you. And in many ways, they even encourage them to do so. That's a reality that we never faced before.
35 just in the last
35
week.
just in last week, in 35 different villages.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
But this is like somehow a great tragedy of history that what happened to the Jewish people with the Nazis, and then they seem to be, or not them, but Israel as a state is doing this to another set of people. I'm wondering, like, don't the Zionists and the religious Jews in Israel, isn't this supposed to be like in all ways against their own religion?
No, because our religion is of Jewish supremacy, and our religion is that what we are allowed to do, nobody is allowed to do. Our religion is that we are the chosen people, and our religion is, as the late Golda Meir phrased it, that after the Holocaust, the Jews have the right to do whatever they do. And I wouldn't like to compare it yet to the Nazis. It's still far, far away from what the Nazis did, but it's very comparable to the early 30s, no doubt about it. We are very far from the 40s, but we are very close to the early 30s. Mm-hmm. And yes, the lesson for the Jews, most of the Jews in Israel, the lesson for the Holocaust could be one of two. Or never do what people had done to you, or after what happened to you, you can only live on your sword, you can only live on your power, and you have to right to go crazy, as long as you feel that you are protecting yourself. And Israel chose long time ago the second way, the second path.
I wanted to speak a little bit about the liberal democracies in the Western world. Do you feel that they are enabling this behavior?
Unfortunately, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the fact that Israel is still the darling of the West, the fact that Israel is capable to paralyze the West in labeling any criticism on Israel as anti-Semitism. Look what's going on in Europe. It's unbelievable how Israel manipulates Europe, not only Germany. All over Europe, people cannot dare to criticize Israel because immediately they are labeled as anti-Semites. Mm-hmm. And the fact that Israel is still the darling of the West. You know, the other day I was at the National Day or the Flag Day of Sweden at the Swedish residence, the Swedish ambassador's residence in Tel Aviv. And there were hundreds of guests, very successful evening. And there was a minister, one of the right-wing ministers from the government, as usual. And then she read her text, which was written by the foreign ministry, and then she said, Israel and Sweden are sharing the same values. And someone whispered on my ear, she insulted now 80% of the Swedes. The world continue to treat Israel as if it's a liberal democracy which obeys to the international law, which obeys to all the international institutions' resolutions, which is part of the civilized or so-called civilized West. And that's a huge lie, and we have to call this bluff, because Israel does not share values with the West. Israel does not follow resolutions of the international community by tens and by dozens. And obviously, Israel is violating the international law on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. This cannot be part of the West. This shouldn't be part of the West. And the West should recognize it and realize it. But in our world, interests come before anything else. And the interest is to continue to hug Israel, unfortunately so. By the way, it's very unfortunate for Israel, because this attitude corrupts Israel. Because when Israel thinks it can do whatever it wants and it will never pay any price. Look at Russia. 2 weeks in Crimea, and there were sanctions. Mm-hmm. 57 years of brutal occupation, and even mentioning sanctions is almost criminalized in most of West European countries. You cannot speak about it even.
Luckily, I don't think this is as strong here in Iceland. I've never heard anybody here call someone an anti-Semite for criticizing the occupation. But it seems to have been very effective in Europe, especially. You mentioned that in your lecture, that it's not as effective in the United States. But in Europe, like, this is used a lot. And like we saw Jeremy Corbyn, the former leader of the Labour Party, he was essentially purged from the party on the premise that he was an anti-Semite. When that was absolutely not true. There was nothing to that.
Absolutely so. And this starts to become a problem of freedom of speech in Europe. Not only a problem of Israel and Palestine, but also Europeans should ask themselves, are we ready to be manipulated like this? Are we ready to give up our freedom of speech for all kind of fake consequences and fake terminology? There is not only the right, there is the duty of any man of conscience and woman of conscience to criticize the occupation, to stand against it, and to act against it. And it has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Nothing.
Mm-hmm. You have proposed what you call the one-state solution, as opposed to this two-state solution. What is the essence of that solution? Where does it lie?
Look, originally the two-state solution is the most reasonable solution. Two peoples share one piece of state. They don't get along together. They have different ideas about how should it look. Let's separate them. Draw a line and share the land, and say this will be a Jewish state, this will be a Palestinian state. Sounds very reasonable. The only problem is that in the last 57 years, Israel did anything possible to avoid, to destroy this solution. Namely by settling over 500,000 Jewish settlers in the West Bank and another 200,000, 250,000 settlers in East Jerusalem. Altogether over 700,000 settlers. they will never be removed. And if they will never be removed, there is no viable Palestinian state. Cannot be. And we can continue to dream about this impossible dream of two-state solution. I think many do it in a very cynical way, like the EU and the United States. They know it will never happen, but they continue to talk about it because by this they're clean their conscience. They say, here we have a solution. It's on the shelf. We just have to take it and use it and implement it. One day we'll do it. But they know the truth. It's a lie. And instead of continuing speaking about a solution which on the ground cannot be implemented, by all means not. I thought, mainly after 2 visits in South Africa, that we should start to think the unthinkable and to think about the only solution which is left. Ever since 1967, it is a one state. It's not that we have to create a one state. The West Bank is part of Israel. If you like it, if you don't. Gaza is under the control of Israel. It's the biggest cage in the world under the Israeli control, total Israeli control, if you like it or not. It is a one state. The only problem is the regime. It's not a democracy. It is an apartheid state. There is no equality whatsoever. There are 2 peoples. One people share all their rights. The other one doesn't have any rights whatsoever, including even not citizenship. The Palestinians are maybe the only peoples in the world who don't have citizenship of any country. Nothing.
And these are people living in parts of the West Bank or
Exactly.
territories that Israel has taken and are in the territories, and they don't even have citizenship.
Or people in the biggest jail in the world, namely the Gaza Strip, who don't have any citizenship. Even not a citizenship. The North Koreans have a citizenship. The Palestinians don't even have a citizenship. Is this acceptable in the year 2023? Is this acceptable by the state that Europe and the United States is supporting and hugging and financing and arming so much? So that's the question. And then it leads you only to one conclusion. We have to change the discourse. And the discourse must be from now on not settlements, not borders, because this leads to nowhere. We have to start to talk about equal rights. Equal rights between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean for all the people who live under Israeli rule.
Have you felt any support from Israeli people for this one-state solution?
Look, it's a very painful process for most of the Israelis because this means the end of the dream of a Jewish state. And I understand people who were brought up under this dream and their parents who dreamt all their lives about a Jewish state, they must give it up because an equal one-state solution is a democracy, but it's not Jewish. It will be binational. No other way.
It will have Muslims and Jews and
Exactly.
some Christians and so on.
Exactly. But you can't have it all. So right now, answering your question, there's not much support for it. And more than this, nobody discusses it. Nobody talks about it because, as I told you, it's not on the table at all, the whole issue. But what I feel all the time is the gradual change, which is very slow, but is happening. For example, to say apartheid said about Israel 10 years ago and even 5 years ago was unheard of. Even in my newspaper, they never used it. It's becoming almost normal, at least in my newspaper, to label Israel as an apartheid state or as an apartheid state under creation or as very close to an apartheid state.
Like developing into one.
Exactly. The same about the one-state solution. People reject it, but it's legitimate at least to raise it as an option. My problem right now is lack of interest, not resistance, but lack of any interest. People don't believe in anything and don't want to discuss it. Why would they? Life is so good in Israel. Why would they bother?
So they're complacent in their lives and don't really think about it.
And that's exactly the role of the international community, to change it. Because only the international community can make Israel accountable for the occupation, can make Israelis pay and be punished for the crimes. As long as they will not pay and not be punished, they will never change it.
I was genuinely disturbed the other day on the 75th anniversary of the Nakba, and Ursula von der Leyen from the EU, the president of the European Commission, she had like an event or a press conference thing where she was congratulating Israel on the 75th anniversary of their founding, and no mention of the Palestinians, and it was just went way farther than I had thought like possible. I guess I was still naive, like how they support Israel. The EU hasn't been like vocal about the settlers grabbing more land and so on. It hasn't been saying anything, or
only hollow condemnations, which Israel learned to ignore. So they ignore. They get some resolution that they condemn Israel. Nobody cares anymore because it leads to nowhere.
There are no consequences.
And the EU can discuss now for years about labeling the products from the occupied territories, even not boycotting them, just labeling it, which is the most banal thing to do. What do you mean? You buy a product, you want to know where from is it.
Yeah.
ABC. And even this is still controversial, and even this gets brutal attacks from Israel. This is an anti-Semitic step. Explain you why is it an anti-Semitic step when you buy products from Southeast Asia, from the sweatshops there, and you can decide to yourself, I don't buy those products. It's not moral to buy those products. You can decide that you don't want to buy products from Russia because it's not moral to buy now products from Russia. Why can't you know that you buy products which were produced on a stolen land with workers which are totally have no social rights? Why don't you have the right to, at least to know it? And this is anti-Semitism in the eyes of Israel.
This has been just flagged as anti-Semitic, just marking the products coming from there, not like they should do. If they were going to stand up for democracy, human rights, they would do something very consequential, like sanctions, just full on stopping products being moved from these occupied territories. Here in Iceland, there's wine that's being sold, that's being produced on the West Bank, I believe, in one of the occupied territories. It's not marked especially, you can see it's made in Israel, but you don't get to know that it's made in occupied territories.
More than this, it says it's made in old Israel. The winery is Psagot, what you get here. This winery specifically is built on a private-owned land, private Palestinian land. It's a total crime, this winery. The owner lives on a private stolen land. The winery is on a stolen land. And you should know it. And then you decide, do I want to buy wine which was produced in an atmosphere of crimes or not? And you don't know.
There's one certain topic that I wanted to touch on. Netanyahu, the leader of the Israeli establishment, he sort of undemocratically tried to seize power earlier this year. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it sparked a lot of protests from Israeli citizens. That kind of is indicative of the governance that is in Israel. I mean, it's progressing further right. Do you think it will end up in like pure totalitarian fascism at one point if it is allowed to progress like this?
Look, if he will succeed, we will face even a worse Israel than it was. But remember one thing, and here I am in a tiny minority in Israel, like many other things. The protesters are fighting over returning the situation to what it was. They don't want more than this. Which means just to keep the apartheid state. They are not ready to discuss the occupation at all. It's very hard even to raise those are demonstrations for democracy, and they don't let people raise the Palestinian flag in those demonstrations. This is not my protest. I highly appreciate it because they stop some very fascist tendency. It's very dangerous. They are going very far.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to remember, it's about democracy for the Jews, what they are fighting for. Yeah. And would it be in South Africa, it would be a struggle among the white ones about the kind of regime that the whites have. Yeah. They don't touch the Palestinian issue at all. And by this, I cannot be part of them. Even though really it's very impressive and remarkable. They go hundreds of thousands of people every week to the streets, and they will stop this fascist wave, I'm sure. They are powerful enough to stop it. And what next? Back to apartheid, back to occupation? This cannot be my protest.
So it is in its nature quite hypocritical.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly the hypocrisy of the Israeli Zionist left, which in many ways is worse than the right-wingers. In many ways, not in all ways.
Yeah.
But at least the right-wingers are not hypocritical. They say what they want.
Yeah.
The Israel Zionist left, Labour Party and others are the biggest hypocrites because they established the occupation. It's not the right-wingers who establish it. They established the settlements. It's not the right-wingers who establish it. They started everything. They had actively done the Nakba. It was not the right-wingers. It was the socialist left of Israel.
It's a horrible thing. They want progressive things for Jews and for the Israelis, but they won't do the same for the Palestinians.
Exactly.
But one hopes that, like you were mentioning, calling Israel an apartheid state was kind of completely radical just a couple of years ago. But luckily today it seems to be more, common. So hopefully this one-state solution can become more known in the consciousness. Maybe hopefully the Israeli people will realize the need, because like you mentioned, Israel is the one state. Palestine doesn't really have a state, they're totally controlled.
Absolutely, and the challenge is even bigger because once Europe and the United States will stand behind the one-state solution, and the way is still very long to this, then they might come to Israel and say, what about the one-state solution? What about equal rights? Mm-hmm. And then Israel will have to say, no, we object equal rights. And the moment Israel will say so, which it will, Israel declares itself by itself as an apartheid state. If you say no to equal rights, you say, I am an apartheid state. Yeah. And then it is the time for the world to act.
Mm-hmm. Gideon Levy, thank you very much. And we are in solidarity with the Palestinians. We hope this one-state solution can become more known, because it seems to be the only viable way forward. Thank you very much, dear listeners. See you next time.
And thank you very much to you, and thank you for the good job you are doing, still paying solidarity to the Palestinians, to the freedom fighters, to the people who really fight and struggle for human rights and for implementing the international law. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Gideon, for all you've done with integrity.